It's a pleasure to be here, and it's really, I'm just thrilled to be able to share this work. This has actually been the most fun I've had yet in my career, and it is just I'm just thrilled to be able to be here. So with that, I'll just get started on describing the journey of the Neonatal Intuitive Feeding Technology. So this isn't your standard academic talk. It is really kind of a story about how it came to be that we ended up with a SLAB grant and a NIFTY Cup. And so I'm going to start with the pitch that we gave SLAB, because I think it's for those of you who are familiar with it, you'll understand kind of how the process goes. And for those who don't know it, it's a very unique experience and opportunity. I'll then go back to where did this idea come from? How did it get developed? Who was involved with the design? And talk about our formative research and then our redesign process and then our next steps. So the pitch, this was in July 2015, and it was at Saving Lives at Birth. Grand Challenges Round 5. It's a unique grant opportunity in that you have a 3-page application. Anybody in the world can submit it. It's an online process. There's no OSP or sort of, it's just freely submit your idea. And then they select a number of finalists. So in this case, there were 52 finalists. They flew from around the world. They flew us to Washington, D.C., and it was like Shark Tank for maternal child health. So you have judges, you have a 15-minute in-person interview, you have 2 to 3 minutes for your pitch, so you really have to work fast in terms of covering all your bases in front of 2 judges in this 15 minutes, and then you get 9 minutes of question and answers from the judges. And then the next day they tell you who are nominated for the awards. So in our case, there were 17 out of the 52 who ended up being nominated. So I'm going to take you through the pitch, just so you can kind of see, like, what is it? So what is the NIFTY Cup? What's our idea? What's great about it? It's a feeding cup for infants with breastfeeding difficulties targeted for these infants in low resource settings. It's designed to optimize efficient feeding, and it enable hand expression of breast milk directly into the cup, so you can use fewer implements. It's simple, safe, easy to clean, and affordable. Why do we need a cup? We have lots of specialty tools that we use in high resource settings, and these are some examples of what we use. We use Mead-Johnson feeders, Haberman feeders, pigeon nipples, oral gastric tubes, finger feeding. And in low resource settings, what WHO and UNICEF recommend is that we should cup feed our infants and hand express breast milk to do the cup feeding. And the reason for this is that in low resource settings, you have a lot of problems with water quality and electricity. And I think probably many of you know this reality already. And bottles and other implements just tend to be very problematic in terms of keeping them clean. And so, but what actually happens, so this is what WHO recommends. And this is sort of a survey of what people are doing today in India in terms of feeding infants who can't breastfeed. So there are sippy cups, there are spoons, there are this Polyday, which I'll go into a little bit more, and syringes, and all of these have issues. The primary one is infection, especially with those sippy cups. It's a huge issue. With injury, the spoons will often be placed too far into the mouth. And then you also have a problem with the cups having, a lot of them are made out of a really hard material. So they end up injuring the oral cavity during the feeding process. There's a lot of spillage with these cups. About 1/3 of maternal milk is spilled in a given feed on average, if you look across all the studies. So there's a lot of spillage. And if you think about hand expressing your breast milk and then spilling 1/3 of it every time you feed, which can be 8 to 10, 12 times in a 24-hour period, it's not very appealing. And one of the issues is that with a standard cup, if you look at your coffee cups that you have a relatively wide brim on that cup. And so maintaining a bolus of milk on that brim to have a very calm and efficient feeding becomes really difficult. And what that results is a really stressed out infant. They easily fatigue, they don't get the nutrition they need in the time they need to get it to grow. They will then basically have a longer feeding duration and spend more energy than they have to actually feed. And that just ends up being a cycle of undernutrition, failure to grow, and a lot of times morbidity and as well as mortality. So this is the NIFTY, and this is what the pitch was, basically. We've got all of these new designs that address these issues. So we have this unique reservoir that optimizes the efficient delivery of milk. So it holds a small bolus of milk that can constantly be available to the infant. And in the bolus, this little reservoir also actually minimizes spillage. So there's a lot less spillage because of the way that it's shaped than with a conventional cup. So you have very little spillage. We have embossed measurements so you can track how much infants are taking in. And it was sized specifically for hand expression so that you can have, you can minimize the number of implements that are used and further reduce infection risk. It's made out of silicone, which is soft, it's injury-free, it's inexpensive, it's very inexpensive, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. It's durable and you can autoclave it. You can boil it. It's a great material for this particular tool. So breastfeeding difficulties, how many people can we affect? We could affect 7.6 million preterms are born in Africa and South Asia every year. There are 233,000 children born globally with an oral cleft, and 95% of those are born in a developing country. Mothers, orphans, about 273,000 mothers die during childbirth, leaving infants with the need to feed another way. HIV positive mothers, there's about 500,000 of those a year. Many of those are indicated to breastfeed, but for those who are contraindicated to breastfeed, this may be an alternative tool. And then children with cardiac or other types of birth defects can benefit from the NIFTY Cup. So here was my lovely hand in another kind of cup, which is a little shot glass they use in Thailand for cup feeding, at the slab. I gave my pitch using soy milk, and it seemed to go well. I was pretty nervous, so my hand was a little shaky during the demo, but it went fine. And the next day we were awarded this, and I have to say that this actually was a joint submission with PACT. And you'll learn that they've been really intimately involved, as well as Seattle Children's, in the design work for this. And I just was fortunate to be able to go to the Development Exchange Conference where this was presented and give the pitch. So the good news is that we got the award. It was very exciting to be in that room and have your name called. It was, I think, second to the last one or something like that. So you're just sort of sweating bullets as they announce it. But it was really exciting and of course extraordinarily rewarding, because this project actually started in 2010. So it has had a very slow developmental life over the years, and you just sort of wonder, like, well, does anybody know about this? Do they think it's useful? You know, you kind of go through that period of self-doubt and questioning its utility, and this was just absolutely fantastic, a real highlight, and I think a testament to all of us who in our team have really put this together and devoted a lot of volunteer time in making it happen. So how did it happen? Where did it start? It started in 2010, and it started actually, I was just going to say a little bit about my background for this. So part of my interest was, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ethiopia and lived in Nigeria as a Rotary Exchange student. I was interested in global health. And then I ended up here doing my PhD in craniofacial and with Michael Cunningham and other people on plagiocephaly. And just was interested, and in 2009 came back to Seattle and melding the two. And Michael and I had several conversations about what that might look like in terms of studies in Ghana and different opportunities. And I had actually applied for it was a K award and was awarded that in December of 2009. And in the spring, I took this class on global health nutrition. This was Global Health 555, taught by Jonathan Gorstein. And we had to have a class project. And I had craniofacial and global health on my mind and looked at the WHO recommendations and realized that feeding was an issue. My K award focus was in oral clefts. I ended up doing a case control study of environmental risk factors in Thailand, so that also melded really well with kind of what I was trying to do in general. And this was Michael's context at the same time. He has a group called the Partners in African Cleft Training that goes to Africa in Ghana and Ethiopia and Nigeria and does capacity building work, who, if you're in the craniofacial team, I'm sure you know about that work. And he was doing this work, for, I don't know, Michael, what year did you start doing it? 2007. So this was his experience and his reality. I'm sitting in a classroom and he's really out in the field. So when we talked about it, he said, oh yeah, this is a huge issue. This is a major problem. It's like, you know what we do is we bring this little cup that Robin Glass, who's a lactation consultant here, recommended, which is the Foley Cup. And the Foley Cup was really sort of the inspiration for the NIFTY Cup. And these are some examples. This is actually the first Foley Cup that was used to feed a child in Ghana under Michael's program. And this is just another example of the Foley Cup being used. And so he said, well, yeah, it works pretty well. It certainly works from a good flow control standpoint, but there were some other challenges with it. So this is sort of our dissection of it. It had excellent control in this reservoir, which you've seen in the NIFTY Cups looks awfully similar. But it's small, it's 20 mils, so there's a lot of issues with spillage. There was no hand expression that was possible. And it wasn't really ideal for long-term use for children with craniofacial anomalies because it's so small that it really just didn't work well for that. The grooves on this are actually very pronounced. If you look at a Foley Cup, it's got very hard ridges and making it really difficult to clean, and that was a huge concern with this. And the other thing is it's expensive. So it's $6 for 15 cups plus shipping overseas using international postage, and it's not widely available. And we thought, well, what can we do? How can we build on this? What is what we can do enough to make it better, to make it an improved product? And our starting vision was basically something that, like the Foley, had similar, really excellent control over flow, and you could hand express directly into it, so you could minimize the number of implements that you would use, and shape it so that it would minimize infection risk, and then it would be inexpensive. And that inexpensive really was something that we were targeting because we wanted it to be widely available. So in conversations with Michael, I said, Michael, let's go to PATH, because PATH is known for their work on developing technologies for low resource settings. And so we went to PATH. We sent them an email and said, would you be interested in hearing more? We think that this has potential. Just kind of a cold call, and said, sure, we'll give you some time. So Michael and I went over to PATH and met with Trish Coffey, who's a program scientist, and this ended up being our initial design team for the NIFTY Cup. And after a couple of meetings, we were able to come up with some small seed funds to do some design work. And so and this was our original team. Jenna Forsyth is a water engineer. She was actually in the class with me and partnered on the project initially. And then we ended up contacting Mark Foley, who designed the Foley Cup, and asked him if he would want to be part of the conversation. He said, sure, that would be great. And then Michael contacted Robin and said, would you like to be part of this process as well? And that was a go. And then we were able to get a design engineer, which is what I think that we originally felt like we needed to move it forward, and a commercialization officer, which we hadn't really thought about, but it ends up being a really key component of this type of work. So with that, we ended up doing lots and lots of meetings in the PATH conference room, just iterating over and over. And this is a Cabbage Patch Kid that Robin, it's my fondest memory of these meetings, because she would bring her little Cabbage Patch Kid, and we'd have different models, and we'd be moving the model up against the kid's mouth. And so I think of the most dynamic aspect of sitting in this room was the Cabbage Patch Kid. And our conversation, but we ended up coming up with lots of design prototypes, essentially. So we started with a NIFTY. We moved it from 20 mils to 4 ounces, so it became a lot bigger. And then we worked on shape and kind of fine-tuning that. We had an asymmetric flange for a while on this edge of it here, thinking that that could protect from like splash when you're hand expressing breast milk, which really we ended up not needing. And then We eventually settled after, I don't know, it was probably at least a year of meetings on this 2-ounce NIFTY Cup design, which we've lived with actually for the last 2 years. And then really what we needed to do is get it out in the field, because you can't design something that's useful in a conference room at PATH in Seattle, as much as we all sort of bring our unique perspective to it, to test it out and see what it looks like in the real world. We also contracted a drawer to develop some pictorial instructions so that mothers in low resource settings could get an idea of what to do and what not to do with cup feeding that we thought we could include with the tool, and we've evaluated those as well. So the next step was getting grants to do some formative work in terms of evaluating it in the field and then moving towards the redesign. And we ended up doing that formative work in South India. And part of the appeal is that you could compare the Polyday to the NIFTY Cup. So the Polyday is a type of infant feeding cup that's widely used in South India. And this is an example of it. Michael took that nice picture, or had someone here take that. And here it is in use in India. And we wanted to, the thing about this, so I had been doing a review on cup feeding, and compared to other cups that are used, this one really stood out as people like it a lot better than a conventional cup. It seems to, mothers are happier with it, providers are happier with it. They say they can get the milk in the child. And so we felt like it would be a really great place to compare our cup. That it may not necessarily, because it's widely used and it's very inexpensive, maybe it's not the place that it would end up being disseminated, but as a first step, it would be a good place to see, do people like it? Do they? So the nice thing about this is that there's all these sort of different relationships that ended up occurring. So we needed funding, obviously, to do this formative work. And I had approached the Center for Commercialization and got some funds for matching, but I needed to secure some matching funds for this. And so Transforming Faces is a group in Canada. They're a small foundation that does work to support children with oral clefts in low resource settings. And they were interested in this. And Michael actually introduced me to them because he had been working with them. And then they have been working with Sri Ramachandra University in South India, as well as Konkan University in Thailand. And Konkan University is where I, as a KL2, had been doing my my study on oral clefts. So we ended up actually meeting in Konkan, and that's where I met the folks from Transforming Faces, and then going to India, and they were able to introduce me to some potential partners and kind of talk about what it might look like to do some of this formative work there. And we were able to get them engaged. And the really nice thing about this particular location is they have a very large center for oral clefts as well as a busy NICU. So that was our target in terms of who we wanted to reach. And we were able to get a good population of both of those in a single place, comparing it to a nice comparator. So we move forward with, it's in Sri Ramachandra University. It's in Chennai, which is in South India. And these are my collaborators. One, Uma, is the site PI, and she's a neonatologist that works in the NICU there. And then Jyotsna Murthy is a craniofacial surgeon who's in charge of the craniofacial center there. And we just basically used convenient samples, and we had surveys that looked at sort of quantitative, is really wide open-ended questions about what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, how they compared it to the Polyday, what they felt they gained from it. You know, we took photos and videos to get a good sense of what it looked like, the feeding experience for different infants who are different ages. And what we ended up doing is talking to 17 different lactation nurses. Most of those, about 60% of those, both cared for children who were preterm as well as children with oral clefts. So that ended up being a really nice sample. And we had 10 mothers of preterm infants and then 5 mothers of infants with oral clefts that tested it out and completed our surveys and participated in our assessment. So these were some of the challenges that they reported on cup feeding in general. It takes a lot of time, and spilling was a concern. So these are the different concerns, and then we had a Likert scale on 1 to 5. How concerned are you about these different things? The cleaning and the cost didn't seem to be much of a problem. Feeding at night was a little bit more of a problem. And then these were other concerns, and they were broad concerns. So I don't know necessarily that cup feeding relates to diarrhea, but it was certainly a concern of the mothers who were cup feeding. You can see that spit up and respiratory infections were another concern of both mothers and providers. And then one of the things we're really interested in is, can we make it affordable? Can we actually create a tool that would be at a price point where mothers and providers in these settings would be able to get them? And what we found is that the Paladay in India right now costs about 30 to 40 cents, which is a pretty challenging price point. We also asked them how much they would be willing to spend to buy a NIFTY Cup if they were to use it for 2 weeks and if they were going to use it for 6 months. And this is the response we got. So whether when the rubber hits the road they actually will is, of course, is a different question, but at least I think the dollar price range is a pretty good place to be, especially for us, because I think that's what we can get it to, at least based on conversations that we've been having with commercialization people in terms of the cost point delivery. We also identified a couple of additional advantages that we hadn't identified initially, which was they have a lot of problems with the Paladay because it is hard metal on the injury side of things, and we knew that with cups, but I don't think we with spoons, but I don't think we fully appreciated it in terms of how it could affect cups. And then the soft material, it's actually very squishy, helps them control it, and that was a little bit random in terms of what the durometer of the silicone that we chose when we developed it, but it ended up being a very nice feature and one that we're keeping. So the main things they didn't like about it, and I'll get to that, and I'll show you a slide with the proposed changes, was that it was too wide. It was a little bit, the reservoir is too big, and that actually is true for preterm infants, and so that we're changing that. We've also, since that time, had some interest in commercial partners who have been doing some of their own field testing, and they've been doing some work in Malawi and Tanzania as well as India, and have found that they really are recommending we do a smaller cup. So that was part of the commercialization testing that's been going on, and this is their view of the different cups that are being used in India and then where we're going with our cup. So in terms of the changes that we're making this a little bit smaller. So right now it's 22 mils wide, and we're making it 18. And we found some data, actually thanks to Michael, he ended up forwarding me that paper, that actually measured the width of children's mouths in preterms, and so we could kind of calibrate that to the best choice. We are also narrowing this a little bit. That was another request from the lactation providers. This width helps to kind of funnel the milk in a little bit more. And we're making it, initially we had the adjust to keep it volume of 60 mils, but we're going to try a 40 mil cup and see how we go. It may be that the 40 mil cup works better for preterms than children with oral clefts. Children with oral clefts will be using it in the long term, so they'll probably have multiple implements anyway. And then we're rounding this out a little bit, just a little bit. And we're in that process of the redesign right now. Actually, our new prototypes are just coming off next week, and we'll be doing another meeting, maybe with the Cabbage Patch Kid, to kind of work that out. So next steps, where are we going from here? In the SLAB grant, we proposed 2 main aims. One of them was a commercialization aim, and it's to formalize the IP, identify priority countries and segments, evaluate our market size, develop manufacturing scenarios, and commercial partners. And that seems to be going sort of naturally pretty well. One interesting thing about the IP it's actually a really great thing, is all the partners, Seattle Children's, University of Washington, PATH, and the commercial partners we've talked to, none of us want to patent it. We want to make it available at the lowest possible cost, so we're all in agreement on that and getting ready to sign off on that. So there'll be no patent on it, and that will definitely keep the price down a lot more. And then we're going to do an evaluation study. The evaluation study is, and it'll be in Ethiopia, which I'm excited about since that's where I was a Peace Corps volunteer and I haven't actually been back since then. And that also came about as a choice in large part because Michael has done a lot of work there, and then I had lived there, and PATH has an office there, and it just made sense to try and move it away from a place where the Poliday is the comparator to where a standard cup is the comparator. So we have a team set for doing that. It's actually a crossover randomized clinical trial is what we'll be doing. The infants will feed with both cups, and we'll have an opportunity to learn how to use those cups before we measure the feeds. And we'll measure 2 feeds with each cup while they're hospitalized, and then we'll do a 4-week follow-up to see what cup they're using and what their breastfeeding looks like at that time. We're doing this in 130 mother-infant pairs, and in terms of measure our hypotheses. So basically we are hypothesizing the NIFTY will be superior to the standard of care cup, which is just a small little medicine-like cup, is that the duration of feeding will be shorter. We'll have intake will be greater, which is spillage is less. Mothers and providers will prefer the NIFTY cup, and then a greater proportion of the NIFTY users will be breastfeeding at 4 weeks post-discharge. These are our inclusion and exclusion criteria, and this is really still under development, but we are targeting preterm infants who were less than 35 weeks at birth, who are currently at enrollment less than 28 days, and at enrollment between 30 and 35 weeks per the new Ballard score. They will have an anticipated hospital stay of 72 hours, and that's mainly just so we can get enough of the cup feeding experience with both cups to get our measurements during that time frame. And then they need to be with an adult parent, so we won't be able to enroll orphans unless they have a guardian, for example, already in place. Prior cup feeding and congenital anomalies for this particular study will be excluded. They can, it's not, to be in the study. Most of them aren't, I don't think will be breastfeeding. They can be breastfeeding, that's okay.
Expressing breast milk.
Oh, expressing breast milk. We're not putting any criteria on whether or not what they're feeding with. Yeah. Yeah. So for data collection, there'll be a baseline survey, and then we'll collect data on each of the feeds, 2 feeds with each cup, and then at the end of the last feeding, some data on preference, and then a 4-week follow-up phone survey. The analysis is relatively straightforward. It's a descriptive statistics, and then generalized estimating equations for a crossover study. And then I thought I'd just talk a little bit about next steps elsewhere. So the trial for PATH and for the SLAB grant was really focused on preterms. That's the SLAB, Saving Lives at Birth opportunity was very much focused on preterms. And there's still a lot of work to do in terms of children with oral clefts. So once we have this next redesign, I think we'll be going and taking those cups to our PACT, to Michael's PACT partners in those countries, in Ghana and Ethiopia and Nigeria. We're definitely doing another round with our next design in India. And Transforming Faces also has partnerships in Peru as well as Laos, near the Thai border. There's a lot of Lao who come over for cleft treatment, and that may be a population that will be able to use the NIFTY Cup in. And then I'm in the process of exploring its applicability in high resource settings such as our own, in terms of transitioning children, say in a newborn nursery, to breastfeeding in early life. And we'll see how that goes. So these, over the 5 years, have been different partners in funding. and the SLAB grant is managed by Grand Challenges Canada. And then PATH and Seattle Children's, especially Seattle Children's, has put up, and the Craniofacial Center in particular, has put up most of the support for the design work. And certainly I had the advantage of doing this work when I was on my K award, which gave me a lot of flexibility in terms of how I spent my time. And then Transforming Faces has been helpful, and the Center for Commercialization in getting that formative design work done. And this is our team today. It's growing, and this is really the core design team. And it's just been, I think we'd all say, a really fun, exciting journey to be creating this new tool and putting it out in the world. And these are our partners in places who will actually use it, and they've been just fantastic to work with so far. These guys are new. So with that, I'll just take questions. Yeah.
So I just want to follow up my previous question. I would encourage you individually to look at impact on breastfeeding. I mean, you designed it around
Yep.
breast milk. And I don't know about Ethiopia, but in Nigeria, where I've done work on
Mm-hmm.
breastfeeding, the rates are really poor, especially in preterm infants, where there's very clear advantage to breastfeeding. It's a life and death, even
Yeah,
in the U.S.
absolutely. Yep.
And to the extent that something like a technology this could help
Yep.
promote breastfeeding.
Yep. Well, that's actually the 4-week post survey is about. So we're anticipating.
We'll look at that if we're not breastfeeding it initially.
Yes, and we will be collecting what type of milk they're using.
Or if you don't power on it, I mean, I don't need to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Women are breastfeeding, so if you don't even
Yep.
stratify it enough
Mm-hmm.
to look at the effect on breastfeeding.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And actually, the whole SLAB grant was designed to not even look at breastfeeding, and that's being added. And mostly that was because of the scope of the funding and the follow-up required but it's really the most important outcome, essentially, for preterms, right? Survival and breastfeeding at, say, 4 weeks. So I think your point is very valid, and I think we do have to give more thought to how we're going to measure that. Because it's a crossover study, we don't have people are going to self-select in terms of what kind of cup they leave the hospital with and use, and I would anticipate that most of them are actually going to use the NIFTY Cup because it's going to be so much better, which then doesn't leave us with a comparison group. So that's part of the design conversation we're having right now in terms of who do we compare them to, because at the end of the day, it is breastfeeding that matters the most. I mean, that's the point of this for preterms. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Grace.
Great talk. I have a question in terms of the cup and its use in preterm and then in palate.
Yep.
Do you ever envision having 2 types of cup, or if they have,
Yeah. He's laughing because we've had, this has sort of been a perennial question. Actually, I'm going to get the cup. I have one, and I had meant to bring it out earlier. But yeah, there've been a lot of conversations. About, we've always tried to toe this line where we could make one cup that was both relevant for children with oral clefts and children who are preterm. And the idea was born really out of caring for children with oral clefts. From a sellability standpoint, there are 7.6 million preterms in India and South Asia, and 233,000 children born with an oral cleft. So we, I think, have really always tried to keep them as part of the dialogue and part of the picture. Our commercial partners that are interested in this are interested in preterms. They're driving it to be smaller, which we're going to do and then evaluate to see how it works for children with oral clefts. If it doesn't work well, because there's no IP on it, there's no reason we can't have a 60 ml cup, which is, I think, the primary design difference. It might, from a sustainability marketing standpoint, be more difficult to maintain. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah. Michael, do you have anything to add? You've been such a... It should do what?
I think you should go on Shark Tank.
Oh my gosh. Oh, it was stressful. I get very forgetful when I get stressful, which is not always a good quality.
I was kind of to blame. I think in the beginning I was so focused on more efficient collecting that we kind of slowed things down. And once we sort of accepted that it was about preterms, it went faster.
Yeah.
Do you not want to talk about who it is that's interested in that?
I'm not supposed to. I asked.
Oh, okay. It's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. And I think there has to be like a formalization of the commercialization relationship before we can talk widely about it. Yeah.
And then the piece in terms of, say, this country and other preterm issues is whether this cup, in terms of its design characteristics, improves the safety and physiologic stability of preterm babies. And so once sort of the finalized model is made, then we could begin to look at how we might look at physiologic stability with preterms, and probably do that in this country because that has been a barrier to utilizing cup feeding as a transition to breastfeeding here. It's really been paying attention to that issue, and there is not a solid research base about the physiologic stability with cup feeding in general, and some of it relates actually to the mechanics of doing it, which we're hoping with this design will circumvent some of those problems and make it not only an efficient tool but a safe tool for the preterm baby. So that's kind of the next step.
What do you mean by physiologic stability?
Well, preterms, when they are feeding, because swallowing suppresses their breathing, they have the potential for drops in their oxygen saturation, bradycardia. Feeding is a stressor for preterms of all age, and it's unclear whether the flow characteristics of cup feeding makes it more likely or less likely that they'll have any decompensation while they're eating. And so that's been a discussion in this country regarding cup feeding in general.
So in our cup review of the literature, it actually looks like cup feeding is more stable. It's more physiologically stable than bottle feeding. That I think is partly related to the flow of the bottle, and the flow of the milk isn't paced by the child, whereas a cup, it's paced by the child. And there have been some randomized clinical trials that have been pretty well done in Australia and Turkey, that have found that, well, the one in Turkey found that cup feeding definitely improved breastfeeding outcomes, like a very strong effect of improved breastfeeding outcomes among preterms who were temporarily cup fed as opposed to temporarily bottle fed. There was a randomized clinical trial in Australia that was also relatively well done and overwhelms these Cochrane reviews, which have like 3 papers in them. And the problem that they had is 50% of their cup feeders defected. They didn't comply with cup feeding, and I think it was because there was not a lot of training on the cup feeding, and the cup was a standard cup. It wasn't a well-designed tool, and in a high-resource setting where you don't have the same issues of infection and safety, it's just easier, So I think that the verdict is really still out on the utility of. There's a lot of controversy around this idea of nipple confusion, that if you provide a child with an artificial nipple early in life, that they will not then transition to breastfeeding. And there's no clear answer to whether or not that actually exists. But I think that the studies on cup feeding as opposed to bottle feeding are not a definitive answer at this time. So I do think there is a role for it in high resource settings. Yeah.
I also just wanted to say, if it isn't already apparent by your presentation, that your persistence with this project is absolutely unbelievable. I mean, it was a nugget of an idea when you started, and you've gone through times where it wasn't going anywhere, it looked like it was going to die, and you stayed with it the whole time. And now it's more than just successful. I mean, it's going to be, I can say that the company that you can't talk about is talking about
Thank you. Well, I certainly have not done this in isolation. As an epidemiologist, this type of work is definitely not my area. You know, I mean, without you and Robin and Trish and a design team and just all of the people along the way who have been willing to extend a small hand, I mean, it just wouldn't have gone anywhere. So, I mean, it really has been, it's sort of to me like the poster child for multidisciplinary research, because I don't think you can get more interdisciplinary in terms of the types of people that have been involved in the project. So, so yeah. Okay. All right, thanks. Are there other questions? Yeah, Brandon.
You know, I would echo this. I think there's more demand, and you probably are aware of it locally, for this. I mean, having multiple friends that have had preterm kids, and they really struggle with it. I mean, many of whom, you know, pump, and their kids never, you know, they're pumping, and they really struggle with how to get, and many of them have used shot glasses, and that's works the best, but none of them are thinking about it. I think given something like this would be very awkward.
I'm getting more and more emails, so and I got a call from a patient from Seattle Children's who my dad knew, who was like, "Can my child cup feed?" And I'm like, "What?" I would talk to the craniofacial team. They wouldn't talk to me about that. And I said, "Well, you know, it wasn't designed for this group." But we are getting interest from people in Hawaii and just different places. We're hearing more and more about it, and so I think when we get the redesign done, we'll be well positioned to just start sharing it with people and getting it out there more. Yeah, Grace.
Sorry, I have 3 quick questions.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting. One of them, just briefly, if you just want to say something about IP and the decision not to have IP, how easy that was or not. And then the second was WHO, they have this thing where they show the cup as a recommended feeding, and have you talked to them, and is it complicated to actually propose one of the types of things versus, you know, just kind of saying cup and it's in the universe of things people could use? I don't know what that discussion would be like. And then I think I've lost my final question.
Okay, I'll take the 2, and then you can. So on the, we haven't had a conversation with WHO yet. I think if we get our agreement with a commercialization partner sort of solidified, that would be a next conversation to have. Absolutely. On the IP front, actually, it's been really pretty easy. The nice thing about PATH is they are nonprofit. They're not trying to create something that then they put IP rights on. I've had a really wonderful commercialization officer at the UW who basically I think saw that if it was going to live and have a life, it would need to be really inexpensive. And Seattle Children's, I think, has been very happy to join in on that. None of us have, it has been a non-issue. I think I sort of questioned it, like, are you sure? Like, that seems like something you would want to have. And so we've talked about having the trademark, which kind of gives it more of like its brand. But I'm certainly comfortable with it. I think it is probably the best choice for its survivability. Yeah.
And the third one is related to that. Can people just print this then if it's not patented? Is it a 3D printable thing? Or is it complicated because of the parent material? Because you're talking about a company developing it. And that's another domain that...
So we do have CAD drawings of it, PATH does, and we actually, as part of our prototypes, had 3D printed prototypes. The material's not safe for using to feed a child with. So, and the silicone just has much better properties in terms of its durability. I don't know that PATH would necessarily, I think that we would probably want a little more control over who actually manufactures it, and we wouldn't make it the CAD design widely available, and we'll just realize like we may have multiple partners in different places who are making it.
And following
Yeah.
on that, so can you speak to, you aren't interested in patenting it, does that, since it's out there and you've demonstrated that it's an existing technology, does that prevent somebody else? I'm just wondering, is there
Yeah.
advantages to patenting and then making
and patent it.
Patent it.
They could make small change and then go ahead and patent it, right? And so far, I think because most of the interest has not been low, like in a place where you can make a lot of money from it, that we haven't worried too much about that. If it really did start to take off here in the U.S., then maybe we would revisit that. We would have conversations about it. But I think I don't know the patent stuff all that well, but I think there are rules like once the design is made publicly available, you have like a year or something to patent it. And I think too, there was some concern that the reservoir, which really is a Foley reservoir, in a lot of ways, it's smoothed out and it's not as harsh in terms of its grooving, but they filed for a patent. He never went and did anything with it. So, but it felt like maybe it was too similar to existing products to patent. But it sounds like if you really want to, you can find a way to do it. But I don't think there was, looking at the cost-benefit ratio, I think from all of the institutions involved, they didn't see that it would be worth doing. So, any craniofacial questions? I know we've got several craniofacial folks here. Anne, by the way, was really gracious to take a bunch of Anne Hing, she's one of the craniofacial pediatricians here, to take several of the cups to Ghana and just say, here you go, let us know what you think, which is really nice. Yeah.
I'm wondering if we took the 2 ounce.
Yeah.
We took some of the computer printed ones that we
Initially.
weren't able to use, except with water bottle. And,
Yeah.
And at the PACT conference.
Uh-huh.
And they were very interesting. The surgeons were much more vocal about what they liked and didn't like about the cup than the pediatricians. But and it was kind of funny. But the ability for a mom to hold the hand, to grip it around was key. I think even more than the size to express, the volume. So it was all about grip, and so I think that was one of the first ones was the size and how to hold. That was key. Stability, able to set it down and not have it just tipple over while you were expressing them. And then one of the early silicone ones we brought to the clinic in Ghana, and we were able to use those, and so the pediatricians would have moms feed babies. The cups they use there are hard plastic with very thin rims, very irregular. They buy them for a few cents, but they do cut. They're about the same size.
It kind of reminds me of one of Michael's favorite stories is he'd take these Foley cups to his PACT partners, and they would lock them in the closet because they didn't want the preterm providers to come steal all of them. So there's a little bit of territory going on there with the Foley. So you can imagine. I think the NIFTY is a really nice improvement on the Foley. That you'd have the same thing. Where is the NIFTY right now? You've got it. Okay. Because I wanted to just give a little bit of a shout out to the holding bit, which is this little flange here, to Robin, who as an OT is thinking about ergonomics. And if you have a full cup of something in it, this flange just makes it a lot easier to rest on, especially with repeat feeds. So I feel, as we've been talking to commercialization people, they're like, what about this? What about that? And I realized how we just sort of beat this into a dead horse when we were at these meetings, thinking about every potential possible angle. And I look back on it when we're having these conversations. I think we did a great job with being extraordinarily thoughtful with how we shaped it, what the pros and cons were, and what its sort of end utility could be. There's a lot of stressor points, I think, and that's probably true with anything that you design, is there's little tiny points at which you're making trade-offs, and you're like, there's no clear answer, like what's better. should we make it 45 mils or 50 mils or 30 mils? You know, you just sit there and perseverate. And I think I drove the designer crazy because he would just be like, what do you want? And I'd be like, I don't know. Maybe we should do it this way. He's like, what do you want? so that was definitely a learning experience for me. Yeah.
Do you know when your team's going to be going to Ethiopia? Have you guys decided that yet?
So I think the new redesign is going to be finished by the 21st of January, and then our partner is going to take. So we have a manufacturer here in Seattle. These have been very expensive to produce in Seattle. We have found a manufacturer who in South India who's done work with folks at Stanford, but then with the commercialization partner, they've kind of decided that they'll make the next set of prototypes. So the prototypes that they'll be making, I think their turnaround is pretty short. Like my guess is they will be out by March. We'll have volumes of them, and I want to get them back into India. And then my next trip will be both in India and in Ethiopia, probably May, June, something like that.
Not around the time that our team is going.
It's possible. Are you going?
No, but Ann is.
Oh, you're going. Yeah, I think the timeline might be a little tight. But if we have the cups, I think getting some to you guys would be really great. So their team you go about once a year, right? Or Wednesday, whenever. Okay. Yeah. So, and you're going to Ghana? Ethiopia. You said that. Yeah. Yeah. We talked a little bit about that, but I'm a little doubtful the timing will work because I'll probably go back to India once they've finished the next round of formative design work, and there wouldn't be time for that to happen yet. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, I'm more than happy to chat about it. If you don't want to ask a question in front of the group, I'm here and I love to talk about it. So please don't hesitate to come up to me if you want to chat or have other questions about it. So thank you for coming and listening. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.